My daughter-in-law stood in the center of my living room, champagne glass raised high above her head, and announced to every guest at my 72nd birthday party, "This is our house now. She only stays here until we decide otherwise." The room erupted in applause and cheers, as if she just announced something wonderful. I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces, each fragment cutting deeper than the last. My legs turned to jelly, and the noise around me became a distant hum. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was quietly slip away from my own party, past the smiling faces of people I'd known for decades, people who were clapping for my humiliation. I walked down the familiar hallway, my fingers trailing along the wallpaper my husband and I had chosen together 40 years ago. Each step felt heavier than the last. I pushed open the door to my late husband's study, the one room I'd kept exactly as he left it 5 years ago. The smell of his old books and pipe tobacco still lingered faintly in the air. My hands trembled violently as I unlocked the mahogany drawer, the key cold against my palm. Inside lay a sealed envelope with his unmistakable handwriting across the front. To be opened when someone tries to take what's yours. I love you, Margaret. Fight back. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Ann Peterson, and I'm 72 years old. For the past 50 years, I poured every ounce of my soul, every drop of my energy, into building this family from the ground up. I raised 3 children in this house, sacrificing my teaching career to be there for every scraped knee, every school play, every midnight fever. I nursed my beloved husband Richard through stage 4 cancer, holding his hand through the pain, never leaving his bedside during those final agonizing months. After he passed, I opened my doors and my heart to everyone who needed love, support, or simply a warm meal and someone to listen. My friends always called me the family glue, the woman who held everyone together with kindness and selfless devotion. I was the grandmother who baked cookies every Sunday, who never missed a single recital or baseball game, who always had a spare room ready for anyone who needed shelter. When my son Daniel married Victoria 5 years ago, I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. I taught her my secret recipes, shared family stories, and trusted her with the keys to my home and my heart. I never imagined that behind her sweet smile and warm hugs, she saw me as nothing more than an old obstacle, standing between her and my 4-bedroom house in a prime neighborhood. I never suspected that the son I carried in my womb, the boy I loved more than life itself, would stand beside her and watch as she publicly stripped away my dignity. But that envelope in my shaking hands was about to change. Everything. Every morning started the same peaceful way, like clockwork. My alarm would chime at 6 o'clock, though I rarely needed it anymore. Age had trained my body to wake with the sun. I'd slip on my worn cotton robe, the blue one Richard bought me on our last anniversary, and pad downstairs in my slippers. The wooden steps creaked in all the familiar places, a comforting symphony I'd memorized over 5 decades. I'd brew coffee in the kitchen my husband built with his own hands during our 2nd year of marriage. He'd spent 3 months renovating this space, working nights and weekends, insisting everything be perfect for me. The morning sunlight would stream through the east-facing window, the same window where I'd watched my children catch the school bus for 18 years. I'd pour my coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one that said, "World's Best Mom," and settle into the window seat, watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and amber. My rose bushes were my pride and joy. Richard had planted the first one the day we brought Daniel home from the hospital. Over the years, we'd added more, one for each child, one for each anniversary, one for each milestone worth celebrating. The garden had become a living timeline of our family's history, roots growing deeper with each passing season. My son Daniel would stop by twice a week, every Tuesday and Saturday, like clockwork. He'd pull into the driveway around noon with Victoria and my 2 precious grandchildren, Emma and Jake. 7 and 5 years old, with their grandfather's eyes and their father's smile. They'd burst through the front door shouting, "Grandma," and race to hug me, their little arms wrapping around my waist with pure, uncomplicated love. We'd gather around the old oak dining table, the same sturdy table where I'd celebrated every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday for 45 years. The surface was marked with memories, a small burn mark from Daniel's 8th birthday candles, initials carved underneath by my daughter Sarah, when she was 12, water rings from countless family dinners. Victoria would help me set the table, complimenting my cooking and asking questions about my mother's famous pot roast recipe or my secret to fluffy biscuits. She seemed genuinely interested, taking notes in a little journal she carried. "You're such an amazing cook, Mom," Daniel would say, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "The kids are so lucky to have a grandma like you." Victoria would nod enthusiastically, smiling warmly across the table. "We're all lucky to have you, Margaret. This house, this family, everything you've built, it's just beautiful." Her words felt genuine. Her eyes seemed kind. I had absolutely no reason to doubt her sincerity. The house felt alive during those visits, filled with children's laughter, echoing through the hallways, filled with warmth and connection and purpose. This was what I'd worked for my entire life. This was my reward for all those years of sacrifice. I had no idea I was living in the calm before a devastating storm. I had no idea that every smile, every compliment, every question about my home was part of a carefully calculated plan. 3 months ago, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I noticed something that made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't quite explain. I was coming down the stairs with a basket of fresh laundry when I saw Victoria standing in the hallway, holding her phone up at arm's length. She was moving it slowly from one end of the corridor to the other, her eyes fixed intently on the screen. "Victoria, honey? What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and casual. She jumped slightly, clearly startled by my presence. For just a fraction of a second, I saw something flash across her face. Guilt, maybe, or irritation, but it vanished so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Her expression immediately softened into that familiar, warm smile. "Oh, Margaret, you scared me," she laughed, pressing her hand to her chest. "I was just measuring the hallway with my phone. There's this wonderful app that uses the camera to calculate dimensions. I'm working on a design project for a client, and your house has such beautiful vintage architecture. I wanted to reference these proportions." It made perfect sense. Victoria worked as an interior decorator, or at least that's what she'd told us. Of course, she'd be interested in architectural details. Of course, she'd use technology to help with her work. "That's fascinating," I replied, adjusting the laundry basket on my hip. "Technology these days is just remarkable. In my day, we used tape measures and pencil marks on the wall." She laughed again, that tinkling sound that had always seemed so pleasant. "You're so right. I don't know what we'd do without these apps." But something about the interaction sat uncomfortably in my chest for the rest of the day. Maybe it was the way she'd been so focused, so methodical in her movements. Maybe it was that brief flash of annoyance I thought I'd seen when I interrupted her. The following week, I caught her again. This time she was in my bedroom, my private sanctuary, taking photographs of everything. The antique dresser Richard inherited from his grandmother, the vintage vanity with the oval mirror, the view from my window overlooking the garden. She was crouched down, angling her phone to capture the crown molding along the ceiling. "Victoria?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. Her head snapped toward me, and again I saw it. That microsecond of something dark before the smile returned. "Margaret, I'm so sorry I should have asked before coming in here. Your bedroom has the most gorgeous original details. I was just documenting them for inspiration. Do you mind?" What could I say? That I minded my daughter-in-law appreciating my home? That made me sound paranoid and possessive. "Of course not, dear. I'm glad you appreciate the craftsmanship. But as I walked away, something felt profoundly wrong. The way she quickly closed her phone when she saw me. The way her explanation came just a bit too fast, too rehearsed. The way she was photographing everything, cataloging my entire home like she was taking inventory. I shook it off, telling myself I was being a foolish old woman. But deep down, some ancient instinct whispered that danger was creeping into my home, disguised as family. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. The same creaks and groans I'd heard for 50 years, but tonight they sounded different somehow, ominous. My mind kept replaying the image of Victoria in my bedroom, phone in hand, photographing my most private space like she was documenting evidence. "Stop it, Margaret," I told myself firmly. "You're being ridiculous." I pulled the covers up to my chin and forced myself to think rationally. Victoria was an interior designer. Of course she'd be interested in beautiful old homes. Of course she'd want to capture architectural details for her portfolio or her clients. This house was full of original 1960s craftsmanship that you simply couldn't find in modern construction. The crown molding, the hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves. These were features that design professionals appreciated. I was reading malice into innocent curiosity. I was letting loneliness and age turn me into a suspicious, bitter old woman who saw threats where none existed. The next morning, I called my daughter Sarah, hoping she could talk some sense into me. Sarah lived 2 hours away with her husband and worked as a nurse at the county hospital. She'd always been my voice of reason, my practical child who saw the world clearly. "Mom, what's wrong? You never call this early," she answered, concern evident in her voice. I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. "It's nothing, really. I've noticed Victoria taking a lot of photos of the house lately, measuring rooms, going through different spaces. Does that seem odd to you?" There was a pause. Then Sarah laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine amusement. "Mom, she's an interior decorator. That's literally her job. Remember when she redesigned Daniel's office last year? She photographed everything, measured every corner. That's just how she works." "But she was in my bedroom, Sarah, without asking. Did you tell her she couldn't go in there?" "Well, no, but—" "Mom," Sarah's voice softened with affection and a hint of concern, "I think you're watching too many of those drama shows on TV. You know, the ones where the evil daughter-in-law poisons the sweet old mother? Victoria's been nothing but kind to you. She's always complimenting your cooking, bringing the kids over, helping you with the garden. Maybe you're feeling a little lonely in that big house, and your imagination is working overtime." Her words stung because part of me knew she might be right. Since Richard died, the house did feel emptier. The silence was louder. Maybe I was manufacturing drama to fill the void, creating problems that didn't exist because some broken part of me needed something to worry about, something to feel. "You're probably right," I admitted quietly. "I'm sorry for bothering you with silly concerns." "You're never a bother, Mom. But maybe consider joining that book club Mrs. Henderson keeps inviting you to. You need more social interaction." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my cold coffee and made a decision. I would stop being paranoid. I would stop looking for hidden meanings in normal behavior. I would trust my family, trust that the people I loved weren't plotting against me. I forced myself to ignore that persistent, nagging feeling in my gut, that same instinct that had protected me and guided me throughout my entire life. 2 weeks passed, and I genuinely tried to push my suspicions aside. I focused on my routines, my garden, my weekly phone calls with old friends. I convinced myself that Sarah was right. I was just a lonely widow with too much time to overthink innocent situations. Life returned to its comfortable rhythm, and I felt foolish for ever doubting Victoria's intentions. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Thursday, unseasonably warm for late October. I'd spent the morning working in the garden, pruning back the rose bushes for winter. My reading glasses had gone missing again. I was always misplacing them, and I remembered leaving them in the kitchen after breakfast. I walked inside, wiping dirt from my hands with a dish towel, and headed toward the counter where I thought I'd left them. That's when I saw it. A manila folder sat open on the kitchen table, papers spilling out across the surface. It hadn't been there when I'd gone outside an hour earlier. Someone had been in my house. My heart began to race as I moved closer, telling myself it was probably just mail Daniel had dropped off, or perhaps some gardening catalogs. But it wasn't. My hands started trembling as I picked up the first document. It was a professional real estate appraisal for my property, dated just 2 weeks ago. The header read, "Confidential Property Assessment," and listed my home's current market value at $1.2 million, and I'd had no idea the house was worth that much. The neighborhood had changed dramatically over the years, property values skyrocketing as young professionals moved into the area. Beneath that were renovation estimates from 3 different contractors. Kitchen remodel, $85,000. Bathroom updates, $45,000. New flooring throughout, $32,000. Each estimate was detailed, professional, clearly solicited by someone who was serious about making changes. My vision blurred as I shuffled through more papers. There were printouts from real estate websites showing comparable home sales in the area, a letter from a lawyer's office discussing property transfer options for elderly homeowners, brochures from senior living communities, 3 of them circled in red ink. Then I found the page that made my blood run cold. It was a handwritten note in Victoria's distinctive looping script, scrawled in the margins of the appraisal document. Master bedroom converts to walk-in closet. Remove old furniture, donate or trash. Guest room becomes nursery. Estimated value after updates, $1.4 million. Timeline, 6 to 8 months. The folder slipped from my shaking hands, papers scattering across the kitchen floor like autumn leaves. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. This wasn't casual interest in architecture. This wasn't innocent professional curiosity. This was a detailed, calculated plan to take my home, to erase me from the house I'd lived in for half a century. They were planning to remove my furniture, Richard's furniture, our memories, and throw it away like garbage. They were already envisioning my bedroom transformed into a closet, as if I'd never existed at all. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and felt the walls of my safe, familiar world crumbling around me. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't loneliness creating problems. This was real, documented proof that someone I'd welcomed into my family was actively plotting to steal my life. The birthday party was supposed to be a small, intimate gathering, just family and a few close friends to celebrate my 72nd year. I'd spent the entire day before baking my famous chocolate cake, the same recipe I'd used for every family celebration for decades. I'd cleaned the house, arranged fresh flowers from my garden in vases throughout the living room, and set out the good china that only came out for special occasions. I hadn't confronted Victoria or Daniel about the folder. Part of me still hoped there was some logical explanation, some misunderstanding I couldn't see yet. Maybe they were planning to help me renovate. Maybe the senior living brochures were just research for a friend. I clung to these desperate possibilities, even as my gut screamed the truth. The guests arrived around 6. My daughter Sarah and her family, my son Thomas from Seattle, old friends from the neighborhood, people I'd known for 30 years. The house filled with warmth and laughter, exactly as I'd always imagined. Daniel and Victoria arrived last, Victoria wearing a designer dress I'd never seen before, her smile bright and confident. After dinner, after the cake and the singing, Victoria stood up and clinked her champagne glass with a fork. The sharp crystalline sound cut through the conversation, and the room gradually fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her, expecting perhaps a touching tribute to me, a sweet daughter-in-law honoring her husband's mother. "I have some exciting news to share with everyone," she announced, her voice projecting across the room with theatrical confidence. "Daniel and I have made an important family decision, and we wanted to announce it with all of you here to witness this special moment." My heart began to pound. Something felt wrong. Daniel stood beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. He wouldn't look at me. As Margaret gets older, we've become increasingly concerned about her living alone in this big house, Victoria continued, her hand resting possessively on my dining room chair. It's just too much for one elderly person to manage. The stairs, the maintenance, the isolation. It's not safe anymore. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded sympathetically, looking at me with pity. "So Daniel and I have decided to take over the house," she declared, her smile widening. "This is our house now. Margaret will stay here until we can arrange proper care for her at one of those wonderful senior communities we've been researching. Somewhere she'll have people her own age, activities, professional care. Somewhere safe." She raised her glass higher, her voice ringing with false compassion. "Let's toast to new beginnings and to making the best decisions for our family." The room erupted in applause. Actual applause. My friends, my neighbors, people I'd fed and helped and welcomed into my home for decades. They were clapping for my humiliation, for my exile, believing this was an act of love and not the cruelest betrayal imaginable. I looked at Daniel, silently begging him to say something, to stop this, to defend me. But he just stood there, his face pale, his cowardice written across every feature. He'd chosen her. He'd chosen greed and comfort over his own mother. The room spun around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I felt every eye on me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to gracefully accept my own erasure. Instead, I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and walked out of my own birthday party without saying a single word. I couldn't sleep that night. Long after the last guest had left, long after I heard Daniel and Victoria drive away in their expensive car, I lay in bed staring at the darkness, my mind racing with questions that had no comforting answers. How long had they been planning this? Who else knew? Was I really losing my mind, or was I the only sane person who could see what was happening? At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely. I wrapped myself in Richard's old cardigan, the one that still faintly smelled like him, and went downstairs to his study. If there were answers to be found, they'd be in the filing cabinets where he'd meticulously organized 50 years of our financial life. I started going through folders with shaking hands, not even sure what I was looking for. Tax returns, insurance policies, mortgage documents paid off 20 years ago. Then, buried in a folder labeled estate planning, I found something that made my heart stop. Bank statements for an account I'd never seen before. A joint account opened 6 months ago in my name and Daniel's name. But I'd never opened any joint account with Daniel. I studied the transactions, my horror growing with each line. Monthly transfers of $3,000 from my personal savings account. The one Richard had left me, the one that was supposed to last me through retirement. Over $18,000 had been moved without my knowledge or permission. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the papers. This wasn't possible. This was fraud. This was theft. I kept digging, desperate now, pulling out every folder, every envelope. I found copies of documents I'd supposedly signed, power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, financial management agreements, but I recognized none of them. The signatures looked similar to mine, but the loops were wrong, the pressure too heavy. Someone had been practicing my handwriting, forging my signature on legal documents. Then I discovered the brochures, not the ones from the kitchen folder, but different ones. 3 senior living facilities, each one over an hour away from my current home, each one with notes in Daniel's handwriting. Memory care unit available, accepts Medicaid after private funds depleted. Waiting list, 2 to 3 months. Memory care. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. A sticky note fell from one of the brochures, covered in Victoria's handwriting. Perfect. Remote location, limited visiting hours. Once she's settled, we can list the house immediately. Dave, my real estate agent brother-in-law, says we can have it sold within 30 days in this market. Split after sale 60-40, You promised me the bigger share since this was my idea." My vision blurred with tears. This wasn't just about the house. This was a complete conspiracy to rob me of everything: my home, my money, my freedom, my dignity. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, carefully laying groundwork to make me disappear. I pulled out more files and found something that made my blood turn to ice. A copy of my life insurance policy, $800,000 with Daniel listed as the beneficiary. Someone had highlighted the payout amount in yellow and written in the margin, "AVG life expectancy, 12-15 years. Nursing home costs will deplete savings in 3 to 4 years." They weren't just planning to warehouse me in some facility. They were calculating how long I'd live, how quickly they could drain my resources, how soon they could collect on my death. I sat on the floor of Richard's study, surrounded by evidence of my son's betrayal, and realized I'd been sleeping under the same roof as people who saw me, not as a mother, not as a human being, but as a financial obstacle to be removed. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold hardwood floor of Richard's study, surrounded by scattered papers that documented my own son's plan to erase me from existence. Minutes blurred into hours. The sky outside the window gradually shifted from black to deep purple, to the pale gray of early dawn. My body felt numb, disconnected, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. Eventually, I gathered the strength to stand, my knees protesting after sitting in one position for so long. I walked upstairs like a ghost, haunting my own home, each step an effort that required conscious thought. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I pushed open the door to the bedroom I'd shared with Richard for 47 years and collapsed onto his side of the bed. The dam broke then. All the shock, all the denial, all the desperate hope that this was somehow a misunderstanding, it all shattered at once. I buried my face in Richard's pillow and sobbed with a pain so deep it felt like my chest was being torn open. These weren't quiet, dignified tears. These were ugly, gasping, choking sobs that shook my entire body. "Richard," I whispered into the pillow that still bore the faint impression of his head, though he'd been gone for 5 years. "Richard, what do I do? Our son, our Daniel. How did this happen?" Memories crashed over me in relentless waves. I saw Daniel as a newborn, so tiny and perfect, his whole hand wrapped around just one of my fingers. I remembered his first day of kindergarten, how he'd cried and clung to my leg, begging me not to leave him. I'd sat in the parking lot for an hour sobbing myself before finally driving home. I saw him at 10 years old, running into the kitchen with a scraped knee from falling off his bike, yelling, "Mom, Mom," because I was the one who could make everything better. I'd cleaned the wound, applied the bandage, kissed his forehead, and promised him he was brave enough to try again. I remembered his high school graduation, how proud Richard and I had been, standing in the crowd cheering louder than anyone else. We'd sacrificed so much to give him opportunities we never had. I'd worked double shifts at the elementary school, teaching during the day and cleaning classrooms at night, to save money for his college fund. I saw his wedding day, walking him down the aisle because Richard was already too sick to stand that long. I'd held Daniel's hand and told him I was so proud of the man he'd become, that his father would have been bursting with joy. He'd cried and told me I was the best mother in the world, that everything he was, he owed to me. Had he been lying even then? Or had something died inside him between that day and now? I thought about all the Christmases I'd hosted, all the birthday cakes I'd baked, all the midnight phone calls when he needed advice or comfort, or just someone to listen. I'd given him everything: my youth, my dreams, my money, my unconditional love. And this was my reward: to be calculated like a math problem, to be reduced to dollar signs and timelines, to be disposed of by the child I'd carried in my womb, the boy I'd loved more than my own life. I curled into a ball on Richard's side of the bed, clutching his pillow to my chest, and felt something inside me break that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I must have cried myself to sleep because when I opened my eyes again, harsh afternoon sunlight was streaming through the bedroom curtains. My face felt swollen, my eyes burning and raw. My head pounded with the kind of headache that comes from hours of sobbing. For a moment, I just lay there disoriented, hoping that maybe the last 24 hours had been nothing more than a terrible nightmare. Then I saw the pile of documents on the nightstand, the forged signatures, the bank statements, the insurance policy with its ghoulish calculations, and reality crashed back over me like a freezing wave. I dragged myself to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked ancient, broken, defeated. Her eyes were red and puffy, her skin pale and blotchy, her hair a tangled mess. She looked exactly like what Daniel and Victoria wanted her to be, a helpless old woman who could be easily manipulated and discarded. Something inside me recoiled at that image. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, again and again, until my skin stung and the fog in my mind began to clear. I gripped the edges of the sink and forced myself to look in the mirror again, really look, past the tears and the exhaustion and the devastation. There, beneath the pain, I saw something else. I saw my mother's stubborn jaw, the one that had helped her survive the depression and raise 6 children on almost nothing. I saw my grandmother's fierce eyes, the ones that had stared down landlords and bill collectors and anyone who tried to take advantage of her family. I saw Richard's strength looking back at me, the determination that had helped him build a business from scratch and fight cancer with dignity until his last breath. I saw myself, 72 years of survival, of overcoming, of refusing to break even when life tried its hardest to crush me. No, I said out loud to my reflection, my voice hoarse but growing stronger. No, I will not be a victim. I will not go quietly. I will not let them win. I thought about what Richard would say if he were standing here beside me right now. I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were in the room. Margaret Ann Peterson, you are the strongest woman I've ever known. You survived your father's death at 15. You put yourself through college while working 3 jobs. You raised 3 children during a recession. You held this family together when I was too sick to stand. Don't you dare give up now. Don't you dare let our son get away with this. A strange calm settled over me, replacing the grief with something harder, sharper, more focused. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every elderly person who'd been betrayed by their own family, every parent who'd sacrificed everything only to be thrown away like trash when they became inconvenient. I walked back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my spine straight for the first time in hours. I looked at Richard's photograph on the nightstand, the one taken on our 40th anniversary. We were standing in this very garden, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something our grandson had said. I'm going to fight, Richard, I whispered to the photograph. I'm going to make them regret ever underestimating me. Then I remembered something. The envelope. 5 years ago, on his deathbed, Richard had gripped my hand with what little strength he had left and made me promise something. His voice had been barely a whisper, but his words were clear. Margaret, in my study, bottom right drawer of the desk. There's a key taped under the drawer. It opens the locked box in the closet. Inside is an envelope with your name on it. Don't open it unless someone tries to take what's yours. Promise me you'll remember. Promise me you'll fight back when the time comes. I'd been so consumed with grief back then, so overwhelmed with loss that I'd pushed those words to the back of my mind. But now they came rushing back with perfect clarity. My hands were steady as I stood up and walked toward Richard's study. This time, I wasn't going there to fall apart. I was going there to find the weapon my husband had left me. The war was about to begin, and Daniel and Victoria had no idea what was coming. I walked into Richard's study with purpose. My earlier despair transformed into cold, calculated determination. The room looked exactly as I'd left it hours ago. Papers scattered across the floor, file cabinets hanging open, evidence of betrayal surrounding me on all sides. But now, instead of breaking me, these documents fueled something harder inside my chest. I moved to Richard's mahogany desk and pulled out the bottom right drawer. My fingers felt along the underside of the wood until they found it. A small brass key, exactly where he'd said it would be, taped securely in place for 5 years, waiting for this moment. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled away the old tape and held the key in my palm. The locked box was in the back of the closet, hidden behind Richard's old winter coats that I couldn't bear to give away. It was a simple fireproof document box, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, but it felt heavy with significance as I set it on the desk. The key slid into the lock with a soft click that sounded thunderous in the quiet room. Inside was a single manila envelope, thick with contents, my name written across the front in Richard's distinctive block handwriting, for Margaret. To be opened when someone tries to take what's yours. I love you. Fight back. My fingers shook as I broke the seal. Inside were several items that made my heart race faster with each discovery. First, a handwritten letter in Richard's hand, dated 3 weeks before he died. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. Someone, probably someone we love and trust, is trying to take advantage of you. I've seen the greed in certain people's eyes when they look at this house, at our assets. I pray I'm wrong, but I want you protected just in case. The house and all our assets are in an irrevocable trust. I set it up 2 years ago with my attorney, James Morrison. His card is enclosed. The trust cannot be broken, transferred, or contested. You have lifetime residence rights. Anyone who attempts to defraud you or have you declared incompetent will be immediately disinherited. Every penny goes to charity instead. But that's not all, my love. I've also left you something else. I pulled out the next item, a small USB drive with a note attached. Security camera footage from my office computer. The conversations I recorded. Play this for James Morrison. He'll know what to do. My breath caught. Richard had been recording conversations. When? With whom? There were also legal documents, copies of the irrevocable trust Richard mentioned, showing that he'd protected our home and assets years before he died. Contact information for James Morrison, attorney at law, and a second letter with instructions so detailed, so carefully planned, that I realized my brilliant husband had anticipated every possibility. But the final item in the envelope made tears spring to my eyes. A memory card labeled, "For Margaret," my final message. I pulled out my old laptop, the one I barely knew how to use, and inserted the memory card with shaking hands. A video file appeared on the screen. I clicked it, and suddenly, Richard was there. Alive on the screen, sitting in this very study, looking directly at the camera with those warm brown eyes I'd loved for 50 years. "Hello, my darling," his recorded voice said, and I had to press my hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and someone is trying to hurt you. I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." For the next 20 minutes, I watched and listened as my husband laid out a complete strategy. He documented conversations with Daniel from 2 years before his death. Conversations where Daniel had asked inappropriate questions about the will, about asset transfers, about planning for Mom's future care. Richard had grown suspicious and had quietly taken action. He'd installed hidden security equipment. He'd restructured our entire estate. He'd created fail-safes and legal protections I never knew existed. And he'd left me step-by-step instructions for exactly how to fight back. When the video ended with Richard saying, "I love you, Margaret, you're stronger than you know. Make them regret ever underestimating you." I sat back in the chair and smiled for the first time in days. My husband had given me everything I needed. Now it was time to set the trap. I spent the next week moving like a ghost through my own home, playing the role of the defeated old woman while secretly preparing for war. I contacted James Morrison, who confirmed everything in Richard's letter and added even more protections I didn't know about. I installed new hidden cameras throughout the house, tiny devices that looked like electrical outlets and smoke detectors. I documented every conversation, every visit, every careless word Daniel and Victoria spoke when they thought I was too broken to fight back. Victoria came by 3 days after the party, her face arranged in false sympathy. "Margaret, we need to discuss your move to Sunset Meadows. We've put down a deposit. You'll love it there." "Of course, dear," I said softly, my voice trembling just enough to sound defeated. "Whatever you think is best." I saw the flash of triumph in her eyes, the barely concealed smile. She thought she'd won. She had no idea the trap was already closing around her. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive calm, the kind of beautiful autumn day that made everything feel peaceful and safe. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, painting my garden in warm, amber tones. Birds sang in the rose bushes. The air smelled like fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. It was the kind of morning that belonged in a painting, not in the center of a family war. But I knew better. Today was the day everything would change. I'd spent the previous evening preparing the house with meticulous care. Every surface gleamed, fresh flowers arranged in vases, the good china set out on the dining room table. The smell of my famous pot roast filled the air, the same recipe I'd cooked for 50 years of family gatherings. To anyone watching, I looked like a devoted grandmother preparing a lovely Sunday dinner for her family. No one could see the hidden cameras recording every angle of the dining room. No one knew about the documents arranged in perfect order in my bedroom, ready to be revealed. No one suspected that James Morrison, my attorney, was parked 2 blocks away, waiting for my text message to join us. I'd invited everyone, not just Daniel and Victoria, but my other children, Sarah and Thomas, Victoria's parents who lived an hour away and rarely visited, my closest friends from the neighborhood, people who'd known this family for decades, even Daniel's former college roommate, who worked as a family court judge and happened to owe me a favor after I'd helped his mother through her cancer treatment years ago. 23 people in total, all witnesses to what was about to unfold. They started arriving at noon. Sarah came first, immediately sensing something was different about me, though she couldn't quite identify what. "Mom, you seem, I don't know, energized? Are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, hugging her tight. "Today is going to be a very important day." Thomas arrived next with his wife and 2 teenagers, then the neighbors, the Hendersons, the Chens, old Mrs. Patterson from across the street. Victoria's parents looking uncomfortable and confused about why they'd been invited to a casual family dinner. The judge arrived last, shaking my hand warmly and whispering, "Margaret, I have a feeling this is going to be interesting." Daniel and Victoria were the last to arrive, pulling up in their expensive German sedan at exactly 1 o'clock. Victoria stepped out wearing designer heels and carrying a leather portfolio that I knew contained paint samples, furniture catalogs, and contractor estimates for their house renovations. She'd mentioned on the phone that she wanted to discuss the exciting changes with everyone present. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. As they entered, Victoria's eyes swept the room, taking in all the guests with obvious surprise. "Margaret, this is quite a crowd. You didn't mention you were inviting so many people." "I wanted everyone important to be here," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear. "Today we're going to settle some family matters once and for all." Daniel's face went pale. For just a moment I saw fear flicker across his features before he forced a smile. "Mom, what's this about?" "All in good time, sweetheart. Please, everyone, take your seats. Dinner is ready." The dining room buzzed with confused conversation as people settled around the extended table. Victoria sat at one end, her portfolio open in front of her, confident and prepared to present her renovation plans. Daniel sat beside her, his jaw tight, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. I served the meal with steady hands, Pot roast, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, all the comfort foods this family had enjoyed for generations. Everyone ate and made small talk, but tension hung in the air like static electricity before a storm. People kept glancing at me, sensing something significant was coming but unable to guess what. After dessert, after coffee was poured, I stood up slowly. The room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. My heart pounded in my chest, but my hands were perfectly steady as I placed them on the back of my chair. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I have something very important to share with all of you, something that needs to be witnessed and understood by everyone in this family." Victoria's smile widened, believing this was her moment, her public acceptance of the house transfer. She reached for her portfolio, ready to unveil her plans. She had no idea her entire world was about to collapse. I walked slowly to the sideboard and picked up my laptop, the one I'd carefully prepared that morning. Every eye in the room followed my movements as I placed it on the table where everyone could see the screen. The confusion on people's faces was palpable. Why was elderly Margaret, who barely knew how to send an email, suddenly using a computer at Sunday dinner? "Before Victoria shares her exciting plans," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I'd like to show everyone something I discovered recently, something I think you all need to see." Victoria's smile flickered. Daniel's face went from pale to ashen. I pressed play. The dining room filled with voices, Daniel's and Victoria's voices, recorded in my kitchen just 2 weeks earlier by one of the hidden cameras. The audio was crystal clear, every word perfectly audible. Victoria's voice: "Once we get the doctor to declare her incompetent, we can have her moved within a month. I already have the room reserved at that place in Greenfield. It's 2 hours away, so people won't visit often." Daniel's voice quieter, hesitant. "Are you sure about this? She's still pretty sharp." Victoria's laugh cold and calculating. "Daniel, your mother is 72 years old. Who's going to believe her over us? We'll tell the doctor she's been forgetting things, getting confused. We have those forged power of attorney documents. Once we get her declared unfit, we control everything. The house sells for over $1 million. We split it, pay off our debts, finally live the life we deserve." Daniel: "What about my sisters? Thomas?" Victoria: "What about them? By the time they figure out what's happening, it'll be done. Your mom will be in memory care and the house will be sold. They can complain all they want, but they can't undo it." Gasps erupted around the table. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Thomas stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Victoria's mother let out a small cry of shock. The judge leaned forward, his expression dark and focused. But I wasn't finished. I clicked to the next video, this one showing Daniel at a bank, forging my signature on account transfer documents. The timestamp was clear, 6 months ago. Then another clip showing Victoria photographing every room in my house, narrating into her phone. "Master bedroom has the best light. This becomes our suite. We'll gut it completely, remove all her old lady furniture." Stop it right now," Victoria screamed, jumping to her feet. Her face had gone crimson, her carefully constructed mask shattered. "This is illegal. You can't record people without their consent." "Actually," the judge's voice cut through the chaos, "in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording in a private residence. Margaret's home, Margaret's consent. Everything here is perfectly legal and admissible." I clicked to the next document, projected on the laptop screen for everyone to see. Bank statements showing the $18,000 transferred from my accounts without authorization. Forged signatures on power of attorney documents, compared side by side with my real signature. The real estate appraisals with Victoria's handwritten notes about removing my belongings and converting my bedroom to a closet. Then the final piece, the brochure from the memory care facility with the sticky note in Victoria's handwriting. "Perfect remote location. Once she's settled, we list immediately. Dave says 30 days to sale, 60-40 split after closing. This was my idea, so I get the bigger share." Victoria's father stood up, his face purple with rage and shame. "Victoria Ann, what have you done?" "Daddy, you don't understand," she started, but he cut her off. "I understand perfectly. I raised you better than this. How could you?" Sarah was crying now, staring at Daniel with betrayal and disgust written across her face. "Danny, how could you do this to Mom? After everything she sacrificed for us?" Daniel couldn't meet anyone's eyes. He sat frozen, his head hanging, silent tears running down his face. But I still wasn't finished. I pulled out a folder and began passing around copies of documents to everyone at the table. "This is the irrevocable trust my husband Richard created 3 years before he died. He was suspicious even then about certain people's intentions. This trust cannot be broken, cannot be transferred, cannot be contested. I have lifetime residence rights to this home. Any attempt to defraud me or have me declared incompetent results in complete disinheritance. Every single penny goes to charity instead." I looked directly at Victoria, my voice steady and cold. "You want to know the real twist? Even if you'd succeeded in having me declared incompetent, even if you'd gotten me locked away in that facility, you would have gotten exactly nothing. The trust protects against that. Richard saw people like you coming from a mile away." Victoria's knees seemed to give out. She collapsed back into her chair, her designer portfolio sliding to the floor, paint samples and renovation dreams scattering like ashes. "The house was never yours to take," I continued. "It will never be yours. And now, everyone in this family knows exactly who you are and what you tried to do." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Victoria's mother weeping quietly and Sarah's ragged breathing as she tried to control her tears. The truth was out, witnessed by 23 people, recorded and documented beyond any possibility of denial. Justice, I discovered, could be served cold at a Sunday dinner table. The aftermath of that Sunday dinner unfolded with stunning swiftness, like dominoes falling in rapid succession. Victoria's parents didn't say a word to her as they gathered their belongings and walked out of my house. Her mother's shoulders shaking with silent sobs, her father's face a mask of shame and fury. At the door, he turned back to me and said simply, "I'm so sorry, Margaret. We had no idea." Then they were gone. And I knew Victoria had lost more than just her scheme. She'd lost her family's respect forever. The neighbors left shortly after, but not before Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Margaret. Don't you ever forget that." The judge pulled me aside before leaving and quietly mentioned that the district attorney's office might be very interested in reviewing my evidence of financial fraud and elder abuse. "Forgery, theft, conspiracy, these are serious crimes," he said, "even within families." Within 3 days, Victoria filed for divorce. Her lawyer called Daniel with the news. She'd realized that a man with no inheritance, no house, and a mother who knew his true nature had nothing to offer her anymore. The marriage she'd entered partly to gain access to family wealth was now worthless to her. She wanted out, wanted to distance herself from the scandal before it completely destroyed her reputation. Daniel called me once during that week. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up the phone. "Mom," his voice was broken, hollow. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know who I became. Victoria, she made it all seem so reasonable, so logical, but that's no excuse. I betrayed you. I betrayed Dad's memory. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know I'm sorry." I listened to him cry on the other end of the line, and part of me, the mother who'd rocked him through nightmares, who'd kissed his scraped knees, who'd loved him for 45 years, wanted to comfort him. But another part of me, the part that had been calculating his life expectancy in a nursing home, stayed cold and distant. "Daniel," I said quietly, "some betrayals cut too deep to heal. You weren't just trying to take my house. You were trying to erase me, to lock me away and forget I existed while you spent the money I'd saved for my grandchildren. That's not something that can be fixed with an apology. I know, he whispered. I know. I hung up and changed the locks that afternoon. Sarah moved into the guest room 2 weeks later. Her marriage had been struggling for years, and she needed space to figure things out. Is it okay if I stay for a while, Mom? She asked hesitantly. Sweetheart, this house has always been your home, I told her, hugging her tight. Stay as long as you need. Having her here changed everything. The house came alive again with a different kind of energy. 2 women supporting each other, sharing coffee in the mornings, cooking dinner together, watching old movies and laughing at jokes only we understood. We planted new roses in the garden, one for resilience, one for new beginnings. I updated my will with James Morrison's help, establishing a trust for my grandchildren's education, money that Daniel couldn't touch, couldn't control, couldn't steal. The house would pass to Sarah and Thomas equally after my death, with the condition that it could never be sold to developers, that it would remain in the family or be donated to a charity that helped elderly victims of financial abuse. I enrolled in the community college art class I'd dreamed about for decades. 3 mornings a week, I sat in a bright studio with people of all ages, learning to paint with watercolors, discovering talents I never knew I had. My instructor said I had a natural eye for color and composition. At 72 years old, I was finally doing something just for me. The house my husband and I built was safe. My dignity was restored. My future was mine again. And every morning when I woke up and watched the sunrise paint my garden golden, I whispered a thank you to Richard for protecting me even after death, for knowing I'd need the strength to fight back, for believing I was worth saving. I'd survived the worst betrayal imaginable, and I was still standing. 6 months have passed since that Sunday dinner that changed everything. I'm sitting in my garden now, the same garden where Richard planted that first rose bush the day we brought Daniel home from the hospital 45 years ago. The morning sun warms my face, and I can hear Sarah humming in the kitchen as she makes breakfast for both of us. The house feels peaceful again, filled with the kind of contentment that only comes after surviving a storm you weren't sure you'd make it through. I've learned so much about myself in these months. I've learned that strength doesn't always look like fighting back immediately. Sometimes it looks like quietly gathering evidence, carefully building your case, and striking only when victory is certain. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or DNA, but by loyalty, respect, and genuine love. The people who clapped at my humiliation weren't my true family. Sarah, who moved in to support me, is. Thomas, who calls every Sunday and drives 4 hours just to have lunch with me, is. Mrs. Henderson, who brings me soup when I have a cold, is. I've also learned that betrayal, as devastating as it feels in the moment, can become a catalyst for rebirth. That birthday party, as painful as it was, forced me to remember who I really am, not a helpless old woman to be managed and controlled, but a survivor, a fighter, a woman who has overcome poverty, loss, grief, and now the cruelest betrayal of all. My husband Richard knew something I'd forgotten in my grief and loneliness, that I was capable of protecting myself, that I had the intelligence and strength to fight back when necessary. His final gift wasn't just the legal protections or the evidence he'd gathered. It was the reminder that I was worth fighting for, that my life and my dignity mattered. The hardest lesson has been about Daniel. I don't hate my son, even after everything he did. What I feel is something more complex, a deep sadness for the man he could have been versus the person he chose to become. Greed is a poison that transforms people into strangers, that makes them capable of cruelty they never thought possible. Victoria planted the seeds, but Daniel watered them. He made his choices, and now he lives with the consequences. I heard through Sarah that he's struggling. Divorced, working 2 jobs to pay off the debts Victoria left him with, living in a small apartment across town. Part of me feels sympathy, but I also know that some people only learn through loss, through hitting rock bottom and being forced to examine who they've become. As for me, I'm thriving in ways I never expected at 72. My watercolor paintings hang on the walls now, replacing some of the old family photos that carried too much pain. I've made new friends at the community college. I volunteer twice a week at a senior advocacy center, helping other elderly people recognize and escape financial abuse. My story has helped 3 families already, 3 other mothers and fathers who were being manipulated by greedy relatives who now have the courage and resources to fight back. This house, these walls that witnessed 50 years of memories, both beautiful and painful, stands strong. It remains mine, protected by law and by the love of a husband who knew me better than I knew myself. Every morning I walk past Richard's study and pause at the doorway. Sometimes I swear I can still smell his pipe tobacco, still feel his presence in that room. "Thank you," I whisper to him, to the memory of the man who loved me enough to protect me even from beyond the grave. Thank you for teaching me that I'm worth fighting for. The moral of my story is simple, but profound. Greed destroys families, but truth and courage rebuild lives. Never underestimate the strength of someone who's been underestimated their entire life. Age doesn't equal weakness, and kindness should never be mistaken for foolishness. Family is supposed to be built on love, trust, and mutual respect, not on calculations of inheritance and property values. When those foundations crumble, when betrayal reveals itself, you have 2 choices: surrender to victimhood or rise up and reclaim your power. I chose to rise, and that choice saved my life. To anyone out there experiencing something similar, being manipulated by family members, having your competence questioned, watching people plot to take what's yours, please know this: you are not alone, you are not powerless, and you deserve better. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Seek legal help. Don't let shame or family loyalty silence you when something feels wrong. Your dignity, your security, and your peace of mind are worth protecting, no matter who the threat comes from. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do if your own family betrayed you like this? Would you fight back the way I did, or would you choose a different path? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts, your stories, your advice in the comments below. Your words might help someone else who's going through this right now and needs to know they're not alone. If this story touched your heart, moved you, or taught you something valuable, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories of courage, justice, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Remember, you're stronger than you think, you're wiser than you know, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter your age, no matter your circumstances. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And never ever let anyone make you feel powerless in your own life. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and never stop fighting for what's rightfully yours.